Thank you so much for coming out tonight. I'm really so happy to see a lot of folks interested in this concept. I think you'll find, as I have, that it's very intriguing. There's a lot to learn, and I'm really glad that we have another bite at it so we can learn more. I'm Sue Beckmeyer, Mayor of Pacifica, and I'm very proud and happy to be here to welcome you all. And I would love to introduce all of the other council members who are here. Mayor Pro Tem Bowles, Christine Bowles. City Council Member, where did Mary go? Oh, there you are, Mary Bear. Council Member Myra Espinoza. And Council Member Greg Wright. We also have Nick Hargis from Congressman Liccardo's office. He's representing Congressman Liccardo this evening, here to learn. Yes, really happy about that. Len Matterman is here. He's the CEO of One Shoreline. And our city manager, Kevin Woodhouse, is also here. And you are all here, we are all here, and I want you to know the city attorney said all 5 of us can be here as long as we don't sit next to each other and we don't talk about anything that's coming before the city council on our agendas. Before I turn the mic over to Christine, I would like to read our land acknowledgement. The City of Pacifica acknowledges that we occupy the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. We honor the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples for their enduring commitment to Mother Earth. As indigenous protectors of this land, and in accordance with their traditions, the Ramaytush Ohlone have never ceded, lost, nor forgotten their responsibilities as caretakers of this place, as well as for all peoples who reside in their traditional territory. We affirm the sovereign rights as First Peoples and wish to pay our respects to the ancestors, elders, and relatives of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples. Thank you.
And hi, everyone. I'm Christine Bowles, the Vice Mayor. Mayor Pro Tem sounds weird to me, but means the same thing, of Pacifica. And welcome. I just want to say first, I've known Tom Kendall here on the left for over 20 years through my church, and he invited me to meet this motley crew of surfers a little over a year ago. It's just been so exciting to talk and dream with them a little bit about, different solutions for our coastal issues. So excited to bring this to you all today. Yeah. Oh, and my daughter helped too. My daughter just finished her PhD in ocean science at Stanford and has really great presentation graphics. And so, yeah, thank you. She edited their presentation for them and found a nice little video too. Okay, so I wanted to just thank a few people. And I want to thank PCT for being here for filming today. And then if you haven't noticed already, there are root beer floats in the back, thanks to Brian's parents, Doreen and Frank. So help yourselves anytime. And there's also a little bit of water and some cookies back there too. So just wanted to explain logistics for those of you who haven't been here. If you need a bathroom, just around the corner. So we might, I don't know if we'll have more people coming in, but anyway, we can sit a little closer and help welcome them if they do come in. The presentation's probably a little over an hour, so I just want you to sit back and try to be quiet and respectful and hold your comments and questions to the end. Cindy Abbott, where are you, Cindy? We'll be walking around at different points during the talk with note cards and pencils, so if you have a question, jot it down. When they're finished with their presentation, we'll collect all those, and then we'll take a 10-minute break to help sort it out, take a bathroom, drink break, and then we'll come back and let them answer all of your questions. What I'm going to do now is introduce Rob Coughlin. I just learned how to say his name right. I can't believe I was saying it wrong. But his family disagrees about how to say his name, so I don't feel too bad, who will lead off the presentation today. So Rob's surfing nickname is Bird Legs. He'll tell you more about that. He's an environmental activist, a media strategist, political advocate with a career spanning over 40 years. He started surfing at age 15, and apparently his garage is full of surfing trophies for 5 decades. Rob helped found and was the first president of the Surfrider Foundation. Throughout his life, he combined his love for nature with his expertise in media, producing campaigns and films that have reached millions and impacted legislation, safety, and conservation efforts across the U.S. Rob's also well connected politically and knows how to get things done. In the 70s, he was a field representative for California Assemblyman Leo Ryan here in our area, and later served as White House advisor to President Jimmy Carter, and then also as a special assistant to the US EPA. He was also Dianne Feinstein's first campaign writer, and I just learned today, where's your jacket? When he finds his jacket, he led the political campaign for our tunnel here and raising funds to get that project approved. So just one more thing, you'll meet Rob. I've gotten to know him. He's just a joyful, wonderful person to be around and really inspiring and really loves our ocean. So take it.
Wow, I love it when you talk that way. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight. And I know that everybody was really interested to see if there actually were 4 civic-minded surfers. And here's 4 of them right there, and 1 ocean swimmer. This has been really a fun project for me. As Christine said, I've been involved in a lot of political activities and politics and environmental politics because of my love of the ocean. I started surfing, like she said, when I was a kid, and all surfers are individualistic types, they're loners. It's not an easy group to work with because everybody's an expert and everybody's a boss, and surfers are a tough group to organize. I tried to organize surfers with the Surfrider Foundation, and it's almost as much of an oxymoron to have a surfer organization as it is to have 4 civic-minded surfers and an ocean swimmer. But one of the things that surfers are really good at is having fun. And I've been an activist all these years because I like it. I like to be involved in things that I feel are important. I like to be involved with people that also share important ideas and important causes. I like to do stuff that is not just a waste of time. So I enjoy being an activist, and I think being an activist should be fun. If it isn't fun, I think you should think about doing something else, because it's not good to not have fun. I love to surf in contests. I always had fun in contests, and I knew that I've got a garage full of trophies. In 5 decades, I won surfing trophies in amateur contests. I surfed in some state championships. But I have the belief, the surfer maxim is right, that the world's best surfer is the one who's having the most fun. And so I knew that I was always in the world's best category because of how much fun I was having. And so that's the way I feel about being an activist. About maybe a little over a year ago, I bumped into young Brian Garrity here at a music concert up in San Francisco at Stern Grove. And he said, "Oh, you're Bird Legs, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah, I've been called that before." And he said, "Oh, yeah, I remember you made a speech down there in Half Moon Bay." And he said, what are you doing? We said, here to listen to some music. And so we started talking, and I found out he was doing some work with the Army Corps of Engineers and getting his doctorate. He's got his master's already, right? And you almost got your PhD, pretty close. And so I said, oh yeah, well, I've worked with the Army Corps of Engineers before. I've fought them before. When one of the first battles that we won at the Surfrider Foundation, when we were getting that started back in 1985, we had about 200 members in the foundation then. Now we've got 65,000 members and 250,000 Facebook friends and organizations all over the world. I'm proud of what's happened with the Surfrider Foundation. It's become a real force in the environmental movement in a way that it wasn't ever before. And we got into a fight down in Imperial Beach, down near the Tijuana, down near the border, with the Army Corps of Engineers, and they wanted to build a breakwater project down there that would erect a surfing beach. We had already lost a couple of good surfing beaches back in the 60s. Dana Point was a great surfing beach, and now it's a harbor. We lost that. There was a place in Santa Barbara called Stanley's, and we lost that because of a freeway. And so we fought the Army Corps of Engineers on the breakwater project at Imperial Beach, and we beat them, much to our surprise, and much to their surprise too. And they were so astounded they got beat by a little group of surfers that they invited me to come and make a speech to all their generals and colonels and everybody. And so I did, and I made a speech, and I said, look, we lost some good surfing beaches in the past. We were young and unorganized, but that's different now. We're here, we're going to be here, and we're never going to lose another good surfing beach without a fight. However, there's 1,100 miles of coast in California, and we don't care so much about a lot of those beaches because there's no good surfing waves there. So if you guys in the Army Corps of Engineers want to help us make some new waves, we're interested in that. Well, much to our surprise, the Army Corps of Engineers said, oh, well, yeah, we could maybe do something like that. And they let us use their wave modeling tanks in Vicksburg, Mississippi, to do some initial reef research. Back then, this was 1985. Well, since 1985, they've learned a lot about reefs and about the importance of waves and how waves work. And also, in the last 30 years, the Army Corps of Engineers has been infiltrated by surfers. So getting to know surfers and Army Corps guys in such a friendly way. Over the last year, we've been getting together at the Chit Chat Cafe across the street here every Friday afternoon for over a year, talking about this and working on it. And I've got to be friends with these guys and know these guys. It's been really an enjoyable thing. Like I said, I like having fun. And this has been a fun project for us. So what we're going to do tonight, and we're going to make it shorter. I'm not going to tell you some of the stories that I told at Cindy's meeting last week or 2 weeks ago. I'll spare you some of those stories. But what I'm going to do is introduce these guys, and they're going to show you the results of the 50 meetings that we've had over the last year that Bob Battaglio here did the heavy lifting on the report, and Bob is one of the top, I said in the last meeting, he was one of the top 3 geomorphologists in the country. And Bob was offended, he was hurt. He said, who are the other 2? But I actually did know a couple of other geomorphologists, but I think that Bob has emerged as, I think, the top geomorphologist in the country now. He's too humble to say that, but I'll tell you more about him first. But young Brian here, who I already talked about, he's the youngest in our group, and so we give him the blame for everything. So my feeling is if any of you don't like what we're saying tonight, blame it on Brian. Yeah, blame therapy is always good. But But let me introduce Brian. Brian grew up in Half Moon Bay, and Brian is an ocean swimmer. He swam from Alcatraz to Aquatic Park when he was on the Half Moon Bay High School swimming team. He now is an ocean swimmer, and he can swim from Mavericks all the way down to Martins Beach. He swam 10 miles a day. He's braver than me. I'd never do that. But let me introduce Brian first. He's, like I said, he's a PhD candidate in marine management, coastal management, and I think he can get us started here.
Yeah, all right. Hit a couple slides. So as you see, I'll try to be quick and we'll get into the meat of this with Bob's presentation. So I'll do a little overview. So we're getting into QR codes now. So we have some handouts with a bunch of resources, but this QR code will take you to our full report that we're gonna walk through today. All right, so it's all about the beaches. What are we here for? We think we can do a couple of things at once. A, enhance our protection of the beach. If you go across the street, you can see the effects of the erosion. We also believe we can work with the environment to enhance the environment and to enhance our recreation. Next slide. Oh, another one. So here is a little cartoon of our reef concept. So if you imagine we have our beach here on the shore side, we have sand kind of moving around in that system. However, with the wave energy, it comes in, it pulls the sand out, and off it goes. What we're proposing is an offshore breakwater, basically a barrier reef that'll interact with the wave energy, cause it to break farther offshore. We'll get some good habitat like kelp, calm, smoother water in between to trap the sand. And then our not so hidden agenda is we'll get a new deeper water surf break out there. So, not unknown to anyone, our problem statement is coastal erosion, sea level rise. It is one of the fastest eroding shorelines in the country. 72% is actively eroding sea cliff. And right now we're trying to patch that up with little ways, and we think this one can be working with nature. We also think this would have really good economic output. We have 3.4 billion visits annually in the United States and a huge economic boost for Pacifica. So the question is, can we rebuild the beaches? And I'll be brief about this, why we think it matters, reduce the wave impact, retain the sand, provide the shoreline protection. Marine habitat, we think we can also restore some of the kelp forest that the marine habitat relies on, support the tourism, and in the long run, this will be more cost efficient than the maintenance. So last slide, why are we here? We feel that this proposal can be advanced if there's strong community support, and that's why we're doing these series of public events. We want to better familiarize the public with what we're doing, and we're asking to further investigate this. We think that this concept will work to protect the beach and the infrastructure. And we see this as an element of the City of Pacifica Sea Level Rise Adaptation Plan and not in competition with the current recommendations for the Beach Boulevard Resiliency Project. But this will be supplemental to them. Let's see, next slide. There we go. I'll pass it off to Rob to introduce George really quick.
Okay, thank you. And I've got to thank Brian's mom in the back there for coming up with the root beer float contribution to the evening. There she is. We found out this at home, in my home, a while ago, that when people come over to a lot of houses, they offer you a cup of coffee or a bottle of wine or something like that. We started offering people root beer floats when they come to our house, especially during the summer months, and everybody goes, oh, root beer float, yeah, that's not a bad idea. So when I first met Brian, he came over to our house and we offered him root beer floats, and he remembered it and incorporated the root beer floats into our last meeting, and it seemed like it helped put everybody in a pretty good mood. So we contributed, and it was Brian's mom that figured out how to do all this. Well, I wanted to introduce you now to George Dormerat. George is an East Coast surfer. He started out, he's got such a bio, I have to look at some of it to make sure I get it all in there. Where did he live? Okay, New Jersey, Atlantic City. That's where he started surfing. And then he went down to Old Dominion to get his undergraduate work, and then he went on to get his master's degree in sediment moving and turbulent fluids was his master's thesis. So sediment moving and turbulent fluids to me says sand and waves, and that's what it was. And George has worked for the Army Corps of Engineers, 42 years of experience, hundreds of millions of dollars of projects in the ocean, dredging, sand management. He was the president of the American Shore and Beach Preservation Association. He served on the Pacifica Planning Commission for a while. He was recently elected to the Harbor Commission for San Mateo County. He's been a Pacifica resident for 43 years. And we've got a picture of him on the poster on the door downstairs, a double overhead wave right out here at Sharps Park Pier on the north side of the pier. He says he made the wave. We're all kind of skeptical about whether he really did. But we don't, take a look at that wave, and I think you'll be skeptical about whether or not he made that or not too. But he's a pro. Don't let me interrupt you, George. I was just saying nice things about you. So let's hear what George, he's going to ask about, can we bring these beaches back? That's a big question. We promised you that we were going to try and figure out how to widen the beach and make better waves and cost you less money. So George is going to talk about how the beaches work and how we're going to bring it back here at the north shore of the pier.
Thank you, Rob. I call Rob Legs Coughlin because at the last meeting, I said, well, I thought his name was Chicken Legs. And he goes, it's not chicken legs, it's bird legs. I said, well, chicken's a bird. So now I just call him Legs and I stay out of trouble. All right, there's a gentleman in the back. We're going to solve this issue about that wave. Gentleman in the back, please stand up, Mr. Don Clark. Don was surfing with me that day. And now you know you're my best friend. He's going to tell you whether I made that wave or not. Did I make that wave? Okay. Now our wives are best friends, so he's just careful. Okay. Welcome, everyone. What we wanted to present a little bit is, Brian showed you a lot of words, talked about a lot of different kind of words of what we talked about, and, graphics and stuff like that. We want to give you a little bit of background on what the beach is about, what the coast is about, a little bit about the processes. Basically, where do these beaches come from? Where did they go? You can look out here. Where did the beaches from here go? And can we get them back? So as part of that, we'll talk a little bit about coastal processes. Very simplistic. This one slide took me like 15 years worth of studying to understand. You guys are going to get it in 2 minutes. But low and high pressure systems offshore, they cause winds. Winds blow over the water, and that causes waves. The further away the waves get from the wind field, the bigger the waves get. So if you're a surfer, you really want to be surfing on this end, where the waves are more swell-like, coming from a long distance away. They're big, they're nice and clean. As the storms get closer and closer, it gets stormier, not quite as surfable. When the storm passes, the wind switches to the northwest, and again, it's not that great unless you go to Santa Cruz, because the coast completely turns around over there. So this is kind of that process of where the waves come from. The waves then break along the shoreline. They create currents along the shoreline. Those move the sediments. And we'll take a look at a couple other slides that'll show that a little bit better. Some of the other things that drive our coastal processes that we all have to think about and analyze when we're constructing projects. And the tides, certainly you heard about sea level rise. The three big ones are that storm surge intensity, storm direction, and storm duration. Those parameters over the last 45 years that I've been watching the shoreline here have been changing. And we have data to show that the waves are getting bigger, they're staying around longer, they're causing more erosion. Okay. So here, the waves are now approaching the coastline. When they're in deep water, they're not interacting with the bottom of the ocean. As they come in closer and closer to shore, they start to, quote unquote, feel the bottom. The energy is feeling the sand, and it starts turning the waves, trying to make it parallel to the waves. So as these come in at an angle and that wave breaks, it'll break in shallow water and it creates a current. That near shore current, it's called a longshore current, will push sand back and forth along the shoreline. And there's a lot of different parameters in that, but you can take a look at the shoreline here. When you see waves coming at an angle, then that angle breaking up on that shoreline is pushing sand out of the area. Predominantly in California, if you measure over a long period of time, the predominant transport is from north to south. But there are many reversals. Lindemar Bay, for the same kind of waves that would push sand from the middle part of Lindemar Bay towards Taco Bell, that same wave can be pushing it in the opposite direction in the north part of the bay. So it all depends on the alignment of the shoreline, the direction of waves, and so forth. Here's a satellite image of shore here. There's the waves at an angle. So the waves, the sand, whatever sand is available, is getting pushed down towards Maury Point. And that's going south. So oceanographers, coastal engineers, we all like to categorize everything. You have to put it in a category. So here are some of the categories we kind of throw around: the backshore, the foreshore, offshore, nearshore, all of these things. The important part here is what we typically see is that upper dry beach where it says summer berm. So this red line is what you would see in the summer. The blue line are the wave breakers. So then what happens in the winter is that sand disappears and it moves someplace. Typically moves offshore in what we call a longshore bar. Now you don't see that. Surfers see it. They don't really see the bar, but they know when the bar's there because that's when the breaks are getting better. So you'll hear surfers saying all the time, the bars aren't formed very well yet, because in the late part of the summer, early fall, those aren't moving around quite yet. It's not till the winter waves come in that then you'll start forming the offshore bars, and the waves break on those bars, and you'll get really good surfing. So here's winter and summer beach, right here just south of the pier. And you can look at both in the same areas. You can see one place where the rock revetment is exposed, and here it's completely covered up with sand. So sand moves a lot. It's moving back and forth, going north, going south. You have to account for all that when you're constructing these projects. So here's how I like to describe it. What we see when we go to the beach is that upper portion of 10%. That's the beach that's moving back and forth. What you're not seeing is what's happening under the water, and that's 75% of the beach. So when you're thinking of building a beach, you just can't think about filling that top portion and that's going to be it. Because all of that stuff's going to get just ripped away and moved offshore to where you never see it. So you have to account for that. We do account for that. We can do that. We've been building beach nourishment projects since the 60s or earlier. We have a good idea of what is needed. And if you look at the grain size parameters of your beach, okay, you can look at things like, well, how much sand do I have to put on that beach so that it stays a longer period of time? And there's all these computations that we've done. Rob mentioned all the research that the Corps of Engineers does. So there's things like called overfill ratios, where if you need a certain grain size and the source material, let's say is San Francisco, doesn't have enough of that and only has half of that, you have to put twice as much sand on, so that when the smaller stuff gets eroded away, the size component that you want on that beach will stay there. So all of these are parameters that you kind of have to think about. So where do beaches go? Well over 500 to 600 dams on the coast of California. Now, this is not the Corps of Engineers dam. I think the Corps has, Tom will correct me if I'm wrong, about 7 or 8 of those. Some of them are marked on there. This is just Northern California. But all those streams, you know, during rainy periods, wash sediment down and into the coastal zone. So what we're seeing here is that when you dam those rivers, the sand is not going to get to the coast. So we're already causing a problem. We haven't even talked about the beach yet. Okay, so those rivers typically supply 70 to 80% of the beach sand, but now we're less than 50. So if you look at all those dams, Dr. Gary Griggs from University of California, Santa Cruz, came up with a little great way to describe this. He says if you look at all of that material, it's about 160 to 170 million cubic yards of sand. That would build a beach 150 feet wide, 15 feet deep, 300 miles long. That's a lot of sand. So now here, when we look at what we do in Northern California, you know, you look at Half Moon Bay, Pillar Point Harbor, we're going to be dredging that harbor. You know, over 5 or 6 years, there's only 70,000 cubic yards. We'll look at a little project down in Southern California where we're dredging annually 700 to 1 million cubic yards a year. So big difference between the processes that go on up in Northern California and Southern California. So where did they go? Without a lot of sediment supply, the ocean is still acting on the cliffs. And that cliff erosion is very important. It's also an important component that supplies sand to the beach. So when you armor your cliffs completely, you're again stopping a percentage of the sand getting to the beach. So you'll hear this, our resounding thing is what we really want to do is build that beach out. You know, we've already stopped it. We stopped it through rivers, we stopped it through projects. We want to try to build that beach outward as much as we can. So this is a picture in 1980. In 1980, I worked with Scripps Institute of Oceanography, and we were putting in wave gauges up and down the whole coast of California. And we put one right off the Pacifica Pier. Why? Because I was the one with the funding, and I lived in Pacifica, and I said, I want to gauge in Pacifica. So we did. And that was my ladder. I was working with them installing it. We put a cable inside the pier, and somewhere out there in about 45 feet of water, that gauge is probably still out there. It's actually 4 pressure gauges. And so what we were doing that was different, so a concept came up by Dick Seymour from Scripps Institute of Oceanography, is if you measure all, the pressure at those 4 sites, you can actually tell the angle of the waves coming in. So if you know that wave angle, you can then be predicting the sediment transport. That was the key component. So waves not by itself, but we're also getting the sediment flux or the energy going in which direction coming across. That program is still ongoing, not in Pacifica, for about 3.5 years. But the point of this slide is you can see where my toolbox is on that ledge. We could see that ledge probably over here. And look at the difference between 1980 and 2025. And that's basically permanently lost. So you have some homework to do. I'm not done yet. The homework is going to be important for you to take a look at. You'll see the link. We have a piece of paper right here, the link of this homework. If you can't, and if you don't get that piece of paper, just Google beaches, a river of sand. It was a 1968 video done by Encyclopedia Britannica. It looks like you went back to high school and they had those big reels and you could watch videos. But it's a great video that talks about a lot of these concepts. So the waves move the sand along the coast in like a river of sand. Not a problem until you build some kind of structure in the way. And that's Ventura Harbor. This is the one where we dredge almost 1 million cubic yards of sand every year. So what happens? Well, what do we do with that material? Well, we're kind of lucky. The material is clean. It's trapped on one side of the harbor, and we realized back in the 60s that the natural movement would be to go past this harbor. If we did nothing and did no dredging, the sand would fill up against the structures, eventually close it off, and then continue. So what we have to do is annually dredge it, but what we do with the sand is we put it on the down coast side. It's a process called bypassing. We'll bypass that harbor. We do it at Santa Cruz, we do it at Moss Landing, we do it at Monterey, pretty much all the harbors up and down the coast of California. So we're trying to keep that natural system of material moving from where it was, where it should be, to go further south. And then there's a whole bunch of other kind of complexities you got to worry about. So options. Probably the most important out of all those options to analyze when you're thinking about these projects is the do nothing alternative. In other words, if you do nothing, what's going to happen? What's going to happen to your shoreline? What's going to happen to the infrastructure? What happens to the economics that you're trying to generate? So that's really your baseline, that then anything else that you design, you have to compare it to that and see if you're doing good or not. So you'll see a lot of different kind of options. We're not here pushing any single option. We want you to think about considering other things and in addition to what we have already. But these are kind of some of the different ones. Even strategic setback. That's my term for retreat. I don't like retreat. It seems like we're giving up. So I call it strategic setback. We've already done it here. I don't know, back in the early 80s, those of you who are surfers, you'll remember sitting with Mike Nottmeyer and the gang. Don was one of them. At the house right there at the end of the street near the golf course, we surf all day and drank beer in the afternoon on the porch. Those houses are all gone. They were moved. Lindemar Bay, we moved. Project. So, people, are scared of this word of, managed retreat. We've been doing a managed retreat in Pacifica for quite some time. It's part of your toolbox, and you got to look at that and not just say, no, we're not going to do that. It may make sense in certain cases, may not in others. You also get all these different combinations of things that you can do. Beach nourishment. That's Miami Beach. Back in the late 70s, I guess in early 80s when they were first building that, one of the original, so we do something called, we evaluate the benefits to the cost. So what's the benefit and what's the cost to building the project? Miami Beach started at a 4-to-1 benefit to cost ratio. Now it's almost not calculable, well over thousands to one in terms of all the benefits that that community gets from those kind of beaches. Well, that's southern Florida beaches, different than what we have, but still, the thing is you gotta evaluate the benefits and the cost. So, advantages, those are kind of obvious. The disadvantages is, a lot of times beach nourishment sand will, disappears over a period of time. If there's no constant supply of sand, it's gonna go away, unless you hold it with something. And we'll talk about that. So nature can show us, what to do, what kind of structures to build. The one on the far left is kind of like a headland structure that gets in the way of the center transport and builds on it and it holds the beach. The one in the middle is Greyhound Rock, south of County Line, down here on our coast. It's a large breakwater structure, type of structure, and it builds up the beach behind it because it's blocking the waves offshore. And then you even have structures that look like what we call groins, which are structures that are, normal to the shoreline. Engineering can show us a way also. So I like showing this picture of 1938 Santa Monica Pier. And the reason is that's not that dissimilar for what we're thinking about over here. That breakwater, what was interesting is the city of Santa Monica built that structure. They built the pier, they built the breakwater. The original design had the pier going all the way to the breakwater, beefing up that breakwater, and then there was going to be slips for boats coming off of it. But the important part to look at is look what happened to the shoreline. They did not build that. That's a natural feature. After building the breakwater, it causes a bump in the shoreline. The reason is the wave energy, I won't use the pointer. The wave energy is blocked by the offshore breakwater. And then when you get to the shoreline, there's no waves there, so that river of sand kind of stops moving. There's no energy to move it through. The same kind of thing will happen with groin types of structures. And all sorts of combinations of these things. So when the sand touches the breakwater, that's called a tombolo. When it doesn't touch it, we call it a salient. And you can fine-tune these structures to either have them connect to the shoreline of the beach or not. Those were in the Great Lakes. This one's somewhere out in Europe, where again, they're using it to have a harbor behind it. But the shoreline is what we're trying to focus on. It holds the sand. So can they come back? If you reduce the wave energy, we believe we can. You know, a lot of all of this has uncertainty in it. You know, we had a question, I believe, last time, you know, well, how certain are you it's going to work? Well, nothing's 100%, but we certainly have have more certainty in certain things than we do in others. I tell you, from 1938, when that breakwater was built, it's still there. It's submerged because it's never been maintained, but it's still there. We can build breakwaters that will hold the beach behind it. We also think that we can make these structures multifunctional. A reef in front of it designed in a certain way to improve the waves. Maybe a platform of rock behind it that then kelp could grow. Certainly these structures are very attracted to fish. So these are the kind of the multifunctional pieces of it. Then we would do is build the beach behind it that is held by, in place by the structure, and you build a dune system on top of it. The dune system also acts as kind of the last resource if you've got some mega storm that comes, a 1 in 1,000 year storm. It then is a source of sediment to help provide more protection. Researchers in both science and engineering love to play with little toys. These are the kind of toys I like playing with in school. And so here's a concept of a reef. We built a little model of it. Now engineers, they try to make sure that it's, within scale, because you can get a lot of errors in these kind of things. But qualitatively, you could see if you built that Y-shaped reef, you could see the type of wave. That's a wave tank, probably, I believe that was in Oregon. But there you can actually see how the waves would break. So the Corps and researchers do a lot of this kind of work. When you start designing a project, we do a lot of numerical modeling. We do a lot of physical modeling. These are called physical models. So here's an example of, I call it more of a qualitative model. There's a little bit of quantitativeness in it because as the waves break over this, the researcher collects some of the water in that. And you'll find a link to this. We're only going to show one tiny little piece. It's not a very long video, but we don't have a lot of time to show all of it. I would encourage everybody to take a look at this because it'll show you the various kinds of combinations of things you can do on the shoreline and how they affect the amount of water that will come over top of the structure. So let's see if we can make this work. Okay, there's no voice, that's fine. So what he's saying is, shop at Costco. No, never mind. So he's turning on the pump, and he creates 5 waves, and he has an offshore structure, and what he's showing is that there's very little to no overtopping. Well, that's kind of what I said. I mean, the reef is going to cause that energy to get absorbed over there. What you're not seeing in this is he looks at recurved walls, like that one, and how those operate. He looks at like revetments in front of a wall. Looks at a lot of different combinations. You can see how they all behave in this kind of a little bit more simplistic experiment. Artificial reefs and uncertainty. Yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty in artificial reefs. We're not going to pull any punches. If you all go on Google and go ahead and put in artificial surfing reefs, successes and failures, you're going to find a lot of failures. It's difficult. It's hard to figure out. There have been successes. This is one of them. You can see the wave that they generated, but in the other conditions, you can read about them because there's a lot of parameters that at the time that they did it, they didn't understand. These are not built in there. One of the worst ones was in England, but there's some good ones in Australia and New Zealand. They were kind of on top of all this building of artificial reefs. So solution for Pacifica. A lot of information in here, there's a lot of money. The most important thing to me is that if we do this fancy thing here, and we spend all these millions of dollars, and we build this beautiful beach, and you want to encourage the economics, there it is right there, the economics part, you better be looking at the infrastructure you need to support that economics. You know, if you anticipate thousands of people wanting to come to this area, because where are they going to park? Those are the things you really got to think about ahead of time before you start doing these things. So those, to me, are the three more important things. You really got to evaluate kind of the economics of what you're doing, the impact on the environment, pros and cons, and how it will affect people. Thank you very much.
We're going to leave plenty of time so everybody can ask questions from these guys and grill them later on. But let me now introduce you to Bob Battaglio, who I've known for a number of years because of surfing. Bob also grew up on the East Coast as surfing at Virginia Beach and Cape Hatteras. He's the lead author. You give him the most blame for the project. He did the heavy lifting on it. But Bob is...
It's Brian's fault.
Huh?
It's Brian's fault.
Oh, yeah, Brian's fault. Yeah, well, we blame Brian because he's a kid. But Bob got a master's degree, too. All these guys have their master's degree. This is a very intellectual group, except for me. And last year, or 2023, Bob won the Joe Johnson Award. Now, the Joe Johnson Award is the equivalent of the Oscars to geomorphologists. So even I had to treat Bob with more respect when he won that. It's a very high honor for his being one of the top geomorphologists in the country.
Thanks, bro.
He's too humble to say that himself. But another reason Bob is worthy of listening to is Bob is a big wave rider, highly respected big wave rider. He got, the last time we had a meeting, he got a wave at Mavericks that morning. Did you go out this morning?
I didn't surf today.
Yeah, well,
Too
deadbeat.
busy practicing.
Bob's a Pacifica resident for what? How many years here, Bob?
Oh, 35 or so.
35 years. And George is how many years? 40 years in Pacifica. So these guys have local knowledge and local concerns. So we got to give them credit for that too. Well, I think
That's enough.
master's degree. He was the leader of the Coastal Environmental Science Associates, chief engineer. He was on the president of the California Marine Parks and Harbors Association, and I already told him about your Joe Johnson Award. So we'll let you take it from here.
Thanks,
but
Bob.
we got to treat him with respect. He's a fine guy.
Well, I'm going to talk about the conceptual design that we have in our report, and I'm going to start off talking about the Maury Point Headland, which is a natural feature that traps sand to the north of it and backs the sand up all the way almost to the pier, gets to the pier sometimes. And we use that Maury Point Headland to look at the beach geometry that we would expect to result from our artificial headland. So that's why I'm going to talk about that. And then I want to mention this thing called the BBIRP. That's the Beach Boulevard Infrastructure Resiliency Project, which is something that the city of Pacifica is involved in and pursuing. Our conceptual design is based on one of the alternatives that was in one of the supporting reports. And it needs a little more work, so it's not ready to be built yet. But I just want to mention that a lot of the numbers I'll give you and dimensions were based on that prior work. And it consists of a reef breakwater, a new beach behind the reef breakwater, and then I'm going to talk about the costs a little bit, the construction costs and other costs. So first, let's look at the study area. The study area is Maury Point to the north end of Beach Boulevard. See if I can get a pointer there. So here's Maury Point Headland, and you notice there's a wide beach here. As George mentioned, the net movement is to the south, and so the sand moves south here, and it bumps up against this headland, and then the beach widens, and you see the orientation's a little different. Anyway, so the study area goes from Maury Point up to near Paloma, north end of Beach Boulevard, just north of Paloma Street. And then here's the pier, which I put a red line on it for reference. That's a little over 1,000 feet long. There's seawalls along Beach Boulevard, which goes from Paloma up here down to Clarendon, which is just north of the golf course. And that's about 3,400, 3,600 feet, I think. And then this is another 3,000 plus feet down here, which is a earth levee between the golf course and the beach. So the waves shift the sand back and forth, primarily moving south. The coarse sand, as it turns out, is mostly retained at the north end of this headland. The fine sand is that most of the sand here is over 1 millimeter in diameter, the median diameter. Whereas if you go up to Ocean Beach and the sand that comes down from there, it's 0.4, 0.5 millimeters. So a lot of the sand is local from the bluffs, and also it's the coarse fraction. The finer stuff, this is such a rugged area, and the waves are so big that the finer sand tends to move offshore and down the coast. And I want to point out that this headland is not just a barrier to the longshore movement. It also has a rock reef that's, it's eroded part of the headland out here. And it causes the big swells to break way out here. And that's, beyond where the length of the pier. And that creates a little bit of a wave shadow, which helps trap this sand. Here's a picture of a wave breaking off of Maury Point. It looks small in this picture, but this rock here, which is, maybe half the height of the wave, is this rock right here. And so that wave's, it's at least a 20-foot face. And so that breaks way out here on the reef. And this is what we've proposed. This is based on one of the city's reports. And I've colorized it so you can see it. But basically, it's just we're looking at a rock structure outlined in red. That would be the footprint on the ocean. The yellow shows the extent that would be above low tide. And I'll show you a better picture of this. And then this is this kind of orange-brown color is the beach that we think would persist in the lee of this structure. So a little more on Maury Point. This is a figure out of the report by ESA that I actually worked on when I was still there. I retired about a year ago. And we looked at Maury Point. I lived back here in Valamar, and I run and surf out here, and so I'm kind of familiar with it. But if you stand up here and look, you can see the shore has a different orientation than the Beach Boulevard seawall. And so the headland affects that equilibrium shoreline. Now, if we didn't have the seawalls at Beach Boulevard, you could kind of project this yellow line, which is part of the shoreline formed by Maury Point, and you could project it northward, and you would see that the shoreline would be far landward of where it is now. And then, of course, the back of the shore would be landward of that. So, there could be a lot of houses and the road loss and the like. So this is an image from the ESA report where the alternative was looking at all of Beach Boulevard, both north and south of the pier. We're just focused on the south end. There's a bunch of lines here, so I colorized it. So we have again, the footprint where the structure rests on the seafloor is in this kind of red salmon color. These black lines show elevation contours, so you go from the red to the black line to the next black line, you're going up the slope. And then this yellow would be above water at low tide. And there's a groin or jetty-like stem that comes to the shore. And this is the size beach that we estimated in that study. This is a very preliminary concept level study using some what we call applied geomorphology, where you look at all these sites and you look at the geometry that results from them and you scale it to your site, the waves and the tides. And so that's what this is. It wasn't a very sophisticated numerical or physical model, just a concept. But it does have a basis. And so here, looking just at this reef and blowing it up, what we've done, so you can see it a little better, I've added some little blue lines indicating where you might surf. So this is where the waves would break. They would come in and focus on this outward part and then shoal and break along here, depending on the direction and the tide and everything. It would break better in some places than others, but conceptually you could have a left, what we call a left, and a right. And then also waves would diffract and refract around the headland, and they would reach the beach, and there would be waves along the beach, but the waves would be smaller and actually probably, safer and nicer for people to walk on the beach and get down off Beach Boulevard. So this is kind of our vision, and this is this is our attempt at graphics. This is a volunteer organization, and we're old, and so this is just a picture of a real spot, which I'm not going to name. If you don't know where it is, you don't need to know. And it's a nice wave breaking there, and we kind of widened the beach. So we have a reef and a beach and surf, and then there's also ecological benefits for the rock reef, rocky subtidal habitat. Hopefully fish would love it, that kind of thing. So now I'm going to go into the costs, and everyone wants to know how much it's going to cost. It is expensive. This is why we're doing this, because we would like to encourage the federal government, the state government to pay for an analysis and develop a feasibility study so that we kind of know exactly, well, we know pretty much if we want to move forward with it. We think it would work, but it needs some attention. Anyway, in this table, what we've done is we looked at some other reefs and also at this concept for Pacifica. So here we looked at Narrow Neck Reef, which is in Australia, Oil Piers Ventura, that's Southern California. That was a reef that was almost constructed and paid for by the Corps of Engineers. We can talk about that more later if you want, but it never was built, but it was designed. Pacifica, I'll talk about these parameters, but that's our little project. And then Oceanside. Oceanside is in Southern California, and they're farther along on this concept than we are. They're actually working on the design of an artificial reef to do the same things that we're talking about. And they've gotten funding from the state of California. So this is not as crazy as it might sound as an idea. I wish we would have gotten the money here in Pacifica, but that could still happen. Anyway, pointer, there it is. So we have other columns. So we have the name of the reef, we have the volume in the column, which is CY is cubic yards, that's 27 cubic feet, it's 3 by 3 by 3. And so that's the size of the different reefs, the cost estimated for the different reefs, the cost per volume, which is like an engineering thing, the materials, the wave exposure, and the source that we use. This red box is our number here. This is just for one of the reefs without the sand, the $45 million. And that includes a 30% contingency and the soft costs, the design and the permitting and environmental review. It's based on, the city's reports. This number's lower than what's in the city report because they looked at 2 and they adds all the sand and a few other things. So here is that cost for the reef was only $45,000 at the top there. I mean, $45 million, $45 million. $45 million, and then the sand, if you added in the sand, that would be another $40 million roughly, based on the same sources. So the total would be $85 million, and that would just be for the area north of the pier, not both sides. And then if you do construction cost estimates as an engineer or other professional, you're supposed to consider how far along you are, and if you're at a concept level, you acknowledge that you don't really know how much it's going to cost. And so then what the guidance is that you should estimate, or just say that that estimate really indicates a range. It could cost a lot more, it could cost a little bit less. And so there's some references here, but at a concept level, even with the 30% contingency, which is included, that's a contingency as allowance for things that you don't know about or haven't figured out. The guidance is to say that it could cost 50% more than that. And so based on that, we get a range of 60 to 130 million. So it's a big project, needs some outside funding, which again is what we're trying to get support for and move forward with. And then we have a disclaimer. Now that I've talked about costs and dimensions, as an engineer, I have to say that we didn't get paid for this. We don't represent anybody else but ourselves. Our intentions are good. We're just trying to be helpful. And but if you rely on any of this information, you're on your own. Don't come after us. So, sorry I have to do that. I used to review contracts for my company, and just have to be sure everyone understands. We're doing a favor, we think. We're trying to do a public service, but please don't come after us. Let's see. Next slide. Next is Tom Kendall, and we are going to hopefully have some time for some questions and discussions. Before I stop, though, I threw a lot of numbers at you. Does anyone have a clarifying question that I could answer now about the slides that I went through? If you don't, that's fine. Okay.
Bob, maybe just something you could clarify. When we're looking at options out there, the sand is an investment either way. So,
Yes.
you know, the increment might be a more appropriate focus.
Yeah, just the reef costs and yeah. And of course the other thing I should mention is part of the, and George mentioned this, is that the benefit of the reef is what we call a sand retention structure. It doesn't necessarily keep all the sand there. The sand will still move around, but if you do lose the sand, it won't be lost as quickly as if you didn't have the structure. So if you're just placing sand, you typically have to place more sand more frequently. So there is a cost benefit to paying the extra money to having a sand retention structure or a reef. In our report, we also talk about sand grain size and the benefit of using coarser sand like the sand that is out here now. Yes, please.
I heard in the presentation that it sounds like there's not a lot of sand out there for us to get in other places. When the sand leaves our beach in wintertime, you're saying that according to the size of it, it can either still be out there at the bottom or it's going to move south?
Yes, so the question was, she understood that there's, in our previous talk, I'd indicate there isn't that much sand out there and that the coarse sand is more, doesn't move away as much. And so let me explain. So the coarser sand responds more to the acceleration of the waves, which is on the onshore direction, and less to the drag of the waves, which is both in and out. And for that and for other physical reasons, the coarse sand tends to stay closer to shore. So waves actually sort the sand as rivers do and other hydraulic motion. So the coarser sand that we have does tend to move offshore and move alongshore in the winter, and then it moves back in the summer, but it doesn't move as far offshore, and it tends to come back on when the waves, onshore when the waves get smaller.
And this would be the sand you're hoping is going to build up on our ocean beach?
Well, ideally we would have coarser sand. The way the institutional frameworks are set up, it's easier to get finer sand that's already being maintenance dredged from the San Francisco ship channel. And that would have a benefit, as George indicated, that a fraction of that sand would be the coarser sand, but it's not going to, probably won't stay as long as coarser sand would.
I've been to Holland a few times, so I'm familiar with the beaches that have been
Yeah.
built over many years, hundreds of years ago. And there's a lot of dredging that goes on. Is there a possibility or would it be a benefit in California maybe
Yeah, I do think California needs to think about more coastal engineering projects than we have historically. We have very strong environmental regulations here, and 60 or 80 years ago, we did some things that made sense and some things that didn't. In our report, there's a little bit of a case study on Santa Monica Bay and how the coastal structures there and the sand placement there has resulted in a very wide beach that's very stable. So one of the things we mentioned is there's very coarse sand in central San Francisco Bay that has the same provenance. It's the same mineralogy. It's relic sand from a lower sea level stand, and it is being dredged now for commercial purposes, mostly for construction materials. And the permits are about 1 million cubic yards a year of allowed mining. That sand would work great. Unfortunately, nobody mines that sand or dredges that sand to place it on the beach. So the equipment's different, the institutional framework's different, the economics are different. I do think that is something that should be considered along with this reef, either placing the coarse sand with the structures or just placing the coarse sand. But it would be more expensive than the beneficial reuse of the navigation dredge, the dredging for the navigation channel. So anyway, that's going to take longer. That's another 10-year thing. You have to get people's attention and get them to do something that's, I know it doesn't sound that innovative, but it's hard for big organizations to do things a little differently. So. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, yeah. Let's have a discussion. So we're almost done. Tom's next.
Let me introduce you.
Oh.
Thank you, Robert. Congrats. I told you he was humble. And these guys know a lot. I've really learned a lot from this. Well, I wanted to introduce the last speaker here. Tom Kendall has also been with the Army Corps of Engineers. He's won 30 outstanding service awards. He won the Long Wave Award in 2023. He started surfing in Santa Cruz when he was 2 years old. His dad took him to Santa Cruz, body surfing. So he's been at it for a while. He was on the high school swim team and got a scholarship to Berkeley. He's a local guy, all these other East Coast guys, infiltrators. And I like the fact that Tom's also an elder and a trustee in his local church, and he's on the local prison ministry. I think that's a good thing for surfers to know people that are involved in law enforcement and prison ministries. And he's got the inside baseball knowledge of working at the Army Corps of Engineers as a project manager and a planner that you really need to know. This is a complex report, a study, a proposal, and Tom's going to talk about, is any of this practical, feasible, doable? And there, that'll give you something to talk about here, Tom. Thank you.
All right, so yeah, we had some anticipated questions. I should use the thing to advance the slide. Actually, while I got the mic, just a quick comment on some of the conversation at the end of Bob's talk. I think we do need to start probably with some coarser sand in the lee of this proposed structure. But I think to the extent there might be additional nourishment required down the road, the finer stuff that we can get for a pretty affordable price through the Corps of Engineers navigation program coming from the main ship channel might be what gets brought in for that. But anyhow, lots of details. I should probably not get ahead of myself here. So these are the questions I want to just hit before we open it up to discussion, where I'm guessing questions along these lines are going to come up. So do we know if it'll work? Is there funding for it? Is it going to compete with the proposed hybrid solution? That's a reference to the current front runner for how to handle the situation out here at Beach Boulevard and the city's plan. Hybrid referring to refurbishing the seawall and adding sand in front of it. And then does it compete with managed retreat? So, do we know if a multipurpose reef will work? We're going to say yes. At least at the conceptual level, we're very confident that it will. But what we're really sort of advocating for here is some additional analysis to confirm the real devil in the details regarding the physical and ecological processes. So the key uncertainties we're talking about here, things like how big of a structure do you really need for providing good surfing waves? When Bob was putting up the numbers earlier, he commented, well, we got this column about, the cost per yard. That's kind of an engineering thing. Well, it kind of is, but it gets back to the idea that to really do this thing right, you might need to make a pretty big structure. And so our proposal might be more expensive than perhaps one down on Oceanside, but cost per quantity of material involved might be actually very similar, but you got to make it big enough to really work in the current setting. And so there is an example, I don't think got showed in any of our earlier slides, called Pratt's Reef. This was a sort of proof of concept for doing a surfing reef in California. The thing it did prove was that you could get these things permitted with the Coastal Commission. What it didn't prove was that it was big enough to actually provide a good surfing wave. So that was an example of a surfing reef that didn't really perform, largely due to the insufficient size. So we would want to make sure we're making something big enough. Will repeated sand placement be required? My personal hunch on that is that it probably will be. And I'll speak in a minute about, again, working with the Corps of Engineers Navigation Program. I think there are ways to make any repeated nourishment cycles relatively affordable. And will there be an improvement in ecology? I mean, essentially, when you're putting a reef out, what you're doing is you're taking something that was sandy habitat and making it rocky habitat. So it is a trade-off, but none of us are biologists, and the exact way one would quantify the relative merits of that is something that remains to be addressed. I think I'm on to the next slide. And just general observation, I mentioned Oceanside and so on. This is not a unique challenge to Pacifica. Many communities are trying to figure out, how can we protect our infrastructure without losing our beach? It doesn't have to be one or the other is kind of the main pitch we're trying to make. And so, yes, this is a viable tool for many communities' toolkits. Is there funding for this? Maybe. There are definitely federal programs that could fund or implement this, fund the study of it and or the implementation of it. And the state of California has certainly funded sand placement in the past for shore protection as well as reefs, largely for ecological purposes. So there are sources out there. And again, one of the reasons we really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you is that local community interest is really key for an alternative like this actually advancing through some of the study processes that would be carried out. So right now, as was alluded to earlier, the Beach Boulevard plan did consider a sand retention structure, but because of perceived costs, perceived difficulties getting it permitted, and perceived efficiencies perhaps, it was set aside. And I'm not being critical of that, but I am saying that if there are additional funds brought to the problem-solving process here, it would be nice to give this sand retention concept another look, because it really can nicely supplement what we're calling the hybrid solution out there. So yes, what has the city already done? They have sought federal help with the Corps of Engineers, both in the near term, and this is through what's called the Beneficial Use of Sediments Program. We've alluded to this a couple times already with San Francisco Main Ship Channel. That is a source of sand that when the Corps dredges it, and it dredges it every year, can be brought here similar to how it was brought to Ocean Beach a couple of years ago. And that is a funded program. So I see that as a very likely scenario. Again, maybe more for renourishment cycles to the extent those happen than for the initial, because it's probably not as coarse a sand as we'd really like to see behind this reef. And then the other thing that the city has jumped into is they have a request out. This is more under the long-term needs category. They've got a request for a comprehensive study of Pacifica's shoreline, and that is as yet unfunded. It was looking quite promising based on various sources a year or so ago, but things are a little crazy in Washington right now, and I'll leave it at that. But the point is the city has gotten in the queue for that kind of a study, which could lead to an authorization from Congress and the federal government paying up to 2/3 of the cost to do whatever happens out here. And then disclaimer, similar to Bob's, maybe a little different. This is Tom, the private citizen, saying this, not a representative of the Corps of Engineers, which they still give me a small paycheck as a advisor, but I'm about off the rolls. Come August, I'm really gone. But that was where I did a career. Okay, does it compete with the currently proposed hybrid solution? Again, the hybrid being an improvement to the wall along with beach nourishment, and our answer to that is an emphatic no. Sand retention structures can be added to if the city gets funding now from the state, say, to go ahead and implement the hybrid solution, and then a federal study comes along later and says, gee, you should have some sand retention with this. A sand retention structure can really be dropped in at any time. It's not a now or never kind of thing. So we do not see this as in competition at all with the quote hybrid solution that is the current front runner. Complementary measure basically to bring in the sand retention. You're going to be out there renourishing on a regular basis. If you don't do sand retention, add the sand retention down the road, and those nourishment cycles will be further further between and fewer, however I meant to say that, fewer and further between. Yeah, there you go. Helps extend the time between nourishment episodes and help mitigate the potential impacts of an improvement on the beach, improving the wall on the beach. So if again, holding the line protects your infrastructure, but often causes you to lose your beach. So if you've got something out there helping to retain sand, you're not necessarily going to lose that beach as a result of, quote unquote, trying to hold the line with a wall. So does it compete with managed retreat? Yes and no. It can reduce the need to consider managed retreat as a means for saving your beach. And it can also be incorporated into solutions that already have some sort of retreat element. So why are we here again? This is a reiterating of a slide we did earlier. Strong community support is going to be important if this concept is going to advance. So we want to make you all familiar with it because you are the community. What we're really advocating for is further investigation of the concept as county, state, and federal funds become available to address the challenges we have out here. And we do believe the concept will work both for protecting infrastructure and the beach. And again, we see this as a potential element of the city's seal adaptation plan that does talk about sand retention in a sort of general sense. So this could be a very concrete example of that. So that's why we're here. And then the resources for further study, we try to do QR codes for people who want to grab the, I think we only have one QR code at the end, that one. That's for the report we wrote, but there are several other fun little resources that we thought folk would want to look at, and I think we have a handout somewhere. Yeah, I see people have them. Yeah, so anyhow, that's the rest of the QR codes. So this is, I think, where we take a little break, right? Yeah. So there's a chance for those of you who are really sort of tired of the subject to gracefully exit, and those of you who have more questions, we'll be back in like 10 to address those. Thank you.
Some of the questions. So the first set of and how would they get here?
Okay, so I think everyone heard the question. Yeah, so the question was, what kind of materials would we use for the reef? Where would they come from, and how would they get here, I think. Okay, really good questions. So right now we're looking at a rock reef, and the rocks would be big boulders, probably from a quarry, means they'd be rough and angular. They could also consist of the reef itself, the big structure, could consist of other materials such as what we call concrete armor units, which are reinforced concrete at the size we would be using. And those are typically used when you can't find enough of the big rocks, then you make these big concrete armor units. They have them up in Crescent City. Tom knows all about those. Or there's actually somebody that has a design where you take polyethylene pipe, which is like a plastic pipe, and you strap it together and float it out and sink it and fill it with sand. And that was one of the model tests that we showed you. So there's a couple options. The Australians and New Zealanders like to use the sandbags, and they have more experience than anyone in their polypropylene or other synthetic material bags that you pump a sand slurry into, and the water goes out. It's like a big sand sausage. That's cheaper. In our wave environment, I feel more comfortable with rocks. I would also like to, it would be nice if we could find some rounded boulders to put on the top and maybe some smaller ones to allow the waves to move them around, because the waves can shape surf better than engineers can, apparently, so far. So, but, okay, and then where would it come from? Well, there's several rock quarries in California that you can get to, and I think, and then they would be delivered by barge would be the best way, not by truck. When you're working out in the ocean, it's better if you can bring it by water. And the pier was actually constructed over the water with what they call a jack-up barge. It's a barge that you float out, and then it has legs that goes down, and it can kind of walk. That was pretty cool, how they did that. So I think marine construction is preferable to bring in that much material rather than bringing it by truck. Did I miss anything? Oh, the sand is a whole nother story. We talked a little bit about that. There's the beneficial reuse of dredged material for navigation of the ship channel. All you have to do is pay the incremental costs, as I understand it. Tom, again, could give you all the details on that. That's cheaper, but it's finer. There's sand and offshore deposits that people usually mine. You have to go check those out, look for biotic organisms, and go through a lot of environmental review and time and money, but then you find it and you can dredge the material, supposedly. I mentioned the sand mining in central San Francisco Bay because that sand is being taken inland, upland for construction, like concrete and stuff. So that, you could get approvals to go get that sand right now. It's just, you got to get the right equipment and everything. So I think that would be the best place to get the sand is central San Francisco Bay, but that's going to take probably a decade and some funding to figure out how to get people to do that.
I'm actually going to ask a follow-on question of you, Bob. So the estimates that we showed for the sand part of the costs of the various sand sources out there, what assumption went into those costs?
Good question. I didn't actually do those estimates. I'd have to review the report again. I believe those were typical costs from offshore sources. For other, like in Southern California, there's several offshore sand sources that are already identified, and in San Diego and Southern Orange County, they move sand around. I'd have to check on that. I can't remember, actually.
Yeah, it's just, I think that's important to highlight because my personal opinion, just kind of watching what's going on with the navigation program and the Corps of Engineers, is that sand is going to be a lot more affordable than the numbers we showed, which are a little more conservative and maybe allow for some coarser material to be part of the initial fill. And one little coastal processes footnote, we do want to make sure that we don't just put a structure out there and ask it to recruit sand. We want to make sure that we've brought our own sand to sit behind it so that we're not robbing from Peter to pay Paul. So, you know, there are a lot of places around the world where people, you know, have just basically put in the structure and then it creates this neighbor issue, if you will. So that's not what we're proposing. Anyhow.
And I'm going to not do it as a question, but an interesting thing for folks to research. Are you aware of sand dune remediation using repurposed Christmas trees? In Breakpool, England, where offshore winds with the trees create trenches, sand dunes, and increase beach width. So maybe that tied into a material question.
Anybody that grew up in New Jersey in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, like I did, that's where we always put our Christmas trees. We're on the beach. So that's been going on for a long time. I've seen it happen here. People do that here. Ocean Beach, they've done it, yeah. But that was a big thing, you know, for many, many years. And I still do that. They won't take flock trees, you know, so you have to be careful. But they work good as, you know, and then sand fencing, you know, there's a lot of winds and stuff on those beaches on the East Coast, and they'll use sand fencing, they'll use Christmas trees and all that. So that is a proven technology. I'm sorry, what was? Oh yeah, sure. I mean, if we have and we create a dune system here, and we need, you know, there's no reason why we can, you know, have the city can implement that as a program.
Okay.
I'm going to put it on the city.
All right. So a couple of surf-related questions on the break. A smooth topology for the reef would be most efficient at generating a wave. This seems to be in contrast with constructing a durable wave made of rock. My assumption is that we need boulders to resist wave action. Can you explain, is the rock structure proven to make a good wave for other such projects? And let me add one that ties into it. Can the break be refined over years and tweaked as you get more data and see how it's performing?
Yes, it can be. I think if you built that platform reef out of rock, there could be an opportunity to then cover it with larger sandbags, so that the rock structure maintains the base of the system, and then the smoothness of the bags on top, like one layer, which would provide that smooth. And then it would be like a slurry of maybe a sand cement, something that would last. So you can build over the top of rock, if you have a rock platform below the surface, and then some smooth bags on top. You could do that. I don't think anybody's ever done that. Then I remember reading up on, like Bob said, the Australians and New Zealanders, they'll just pump sand in these bags. And a lot of those, over time, were started readjusting themselves. They move around a lot.
Yeah, so I think I heard in the question the idea that the reef would be kind of smooth and solid, and I think that's one approach, but I've noticed that a lot of the natural reefs have porosity with them, especially coral reefs, but also the rock reefs. The rock reefs around here typically have some irregularity, and which, in my view, allows a bigger wave to break with a better form and break a little harder, because the water supply, as the wave shoals and really starts to pull water towards it, it can pull that water without just cascading into a hydraulic bore. So like the Mavericks Reef is quite irregular, and it's got a couple of things that stick up and big holes and stuff. So, I'm not, I think the quarry stone would be quite, I think we can get quarry stone that's big enough and would be stable. The rough angular stuff locks together better, so it doesn't move as much. You can place it steeper and the like. I would like to, again, have some rounded stone, because I think the rough angular stuff can be a little aggressive, and allowing some rocks to move around would be helpful. As far as adjusting, I think, yes, for a project like this, because it is almost an art, I think, at this point, that you would want to come back and adjust the reef surface, either because of some movement of the rocks or to improve the way the waves are breaking. And that would probably be an ongoing activity as much as you could get funding. So I think it would be a lot of fun, actually, to move the rocks around.
Okay. I think Rob wanted to add something.
One quick footnote on that. I guess there are, when people look at successful reef projects, the real successful ones are the ones where essentially a natural reef just got slightly modified. And so that idea of tweaking later and getting a better end result, I think, is tried and true. But anyway.
That kind of falls into the next question. You mentioned that not all of that, not an artificial reef might fail or not work, but does it fail to be a decent surfing break, but does it still work to absorb wave energy and keep sand?
Yeah, a good example is the 1938 Santa Monica breakwater that was not built as a surfing reef. And it's, you're kind of narrow, it's not very wide, and it works tremendously to break up the wave energy, even up into the point where it was, kind of below the surface of the water. If you look at current pictures on Google Earth or one of those, you'll see there's still, the breakwater is barely visible. You can kind of see a shadow of it, but it's still providing a little bit of protection. There's a slight bump left of the shoreline. So we can look at pieces of this other thing if the reef is not providing for great surfing, I think it'll still provide for good protection and holding the beach, the sand behind it.
Yeah, I just want to jump in on this, but I think it would be easier just to build a breakwater. There's a lot we have a lot more experience with that in the worldwide technology and work that's been done over the many decades, if not over a century. So that's pretty easy, except that it might be difficult to get that permitted, because I'm not sure what the ecological benefits would be. Also, those structures are usually they're less expensive and they're usually kind of efficient in the sense that they have this very steep slopes, and so you use less material. But you get a different type of dissipation pattern with those, and it seems, if you look at nature, it seems like the conditions where the wave dissipation is less rapid, not abrupt, and it's spread out, is where you get an opportunity for marine fauna and flora to use that area. So I think, besides the surfing, I still think a wider, flatter reef would be preferable if you can think about things other than just the efficiency of making as small a structure as you can. That's my design perspective.
Did you consider an artificial reef for other areas of Pacifica, such as the Manor and Esplanade area? And why or why not do you think that it may or may not work? And is there a way that reefs can also function as a replacement for armoring?
Yeah, so actually the city's adaptation plan that was drafted, I think the draft is 2018, actually shows multiple of these very super conceptually. And so, again, following the example of Santa Monica Bay, which is a very large bay, larger than this reach of Pacifica for sure, there's a series of structures, and then sand was placed, and so that the whole shoreline was moved out, and they created a new equilibrium so that the shoreline never wants to go back to where it was before. It actually moved the shore out several hundred feet. So that could be done. So what we have is just a module that could be repeated, and it would be more stable if you repeated it, but we were just focused on this one problem area.
Part of the question is whether, part of it was whether the reef could replace the need for armoring of any kind. Personally, I wouldn't want to promise that, especially, you know, as we go further north along our town's shoreline. I just think we're a little too eroded to, you know, have a reef really save you. I think it's really more of a complementary measure along with some other features that are going to still be necessary.
The other thing to add to that is, as the area of Pacifica gets studied, hopefully in the future, those will be options to look at in that study as you know, placing more of these and having the Corps or a contractor that does it for the Corps, you know, analysis of placing structures at various locations. So that's doable.
Are there quantitative differences with wave overtopping and flooding we see regularly on Beach Boulevard between the use of seawalls or offshore reefs?
The slide that we showed that had a little piece of the video, if you go back at home and look at that, you'll see very qualitatively that they did collect different amounts of water for different kinds of structures. And we only showed the last one, which is, you know, supports kind of the concept we're talking about, was that submerged reef, and it significantly reduced that energy. So I guess the point is, it can be studied, it can be modeled, and I think we'd be able to show that in any study that, you know, what the % reduction in the overtopping of that would be. So, I don't know.
One of the problems in Pacifica is that the development is kind of on the edge. So it's kind of hard to lock that in place. The bluffs are going to erode due to terrestrial processes, wind and rain and shallow groundwater. You'd have to set back a bit to provide a more natural shore form that could accommodate the waves without additional erosion. the reefs would knock the waves down. So, for example, at Beach Boulevard, the amount of wave run-up and overtopping would be greatly reduced. But I don't know that I would remove the seawall and because of the with the reef, because everything's just too close. I mean, it's right on the edge.
So that ties into another question. So thank you for segueing right in again. I think you just answered. How are the homes in other areas in Sharp Park? And access to the beach, the pier, the coastal trail, all the great walking things that are around here. How would they be maintained if the seawall was removed? But you're saying that's not what you're proposing here.
No, it's definitely not what we're proposing. We're proposing an add-on kind of solution that we think will perform well from multiple perspectives for much longer. It does cost more, but it provides a lot more benefits. It would be nice to have wider beaches for access to the water, and you can't really access the water safely north of the pier right now for quite a distance beyond Beach Boulevard. So I think for some people that access is important. And that's something that it would be nice to have again, and the beach can do that for you. Anyone wants to add to that? That was part of the question, wasn't it? Did I answer? Okay, sorry.
And maybe you answered this too by mentioning that there are proposals out there for additional reefs, because the question was, how can a reef stop storm surge and flooding between the pier and south of it at Clarendon?
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at it geomorphically, it would be nice to have more than one of these so that the effect of Maury Point Headland could be extended. What we propose is just like one module that kind of stands alone. It would be much more stable to have several of these. I don't know if people want to do that or not, but it was a concept that was in the adaptation plan for the next step after the armoring and sand placement didn't seem to be overwhelmed with the amount of sea level rise or whatever, and then you would go to retention structures. So we're kind of jumping ahead of where we are right now, I think.
Yeah, one of our challenges, we don't have a lot of experience in demonstrating how it would work. Okay, so certainly up here in Northern California, we don't have a surfing reef like that. Oceanside is probably going to be one of the closest ones that will be building offshore breakwaters that will probably see results of that. So demonstration is kind of a key word. That's one of the things we tried back in the, I guess, 2000, 2001 with some congressional authority that allowed for 7 or 10, Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, sites in the whole country to look at demonstrations. And we talked about, Bob talked about it, he was going to talk more about it. We didn't do that. He said we may talk about it now. There was a area just south, just north, well, it's up coast, it's kind of westerly of Ventura called Oil Piers. It's kind of east of Rincon Point, where then there's a Rincon Island. Those who go down 101, you'll see that oil island with then south of that, years ago, were a bunch of oil piers. And Chevron was required, I believe it was Chevron was required to remove that. And then part of that whole shoreline there is completely degraded. 101 has some rock, and it's just like Highway 1 right near Pillar Point Harbor, only it's a 6-lane highway right along there, and it's the only access way. So that was the place where we decided would be a good location to do a demonstration of a multi-purpose reef. It started as a surfing reef because it was a few of us surfers in the Corps of Engineers who said we ought to put a surfing reef, but then we corrected ourselves. Now it's got to be multi-purpose because nobody's going to want to build a reef for surfers. So we'll do multi-purpose, and part of that was then to build the beach, to build the dune system, the whole system. That system word is important. We were going to build the whole system to that. And then the other important part was we got all the state agencies and federal agencies all on board, Coastal Commission, state lands, everybody approved it and was good to go. We had about 90% design completed, and then the program kind of ended and we never got it built. Bob showed one of his slides had that. That would have been, kind of exactly what we're talking about, here, but we don't have that. Whether we can, there's been some thoughts amongst us in our Friday group to try to get maybe some congressional support to reinitiate that program where there was federal money to do a demonstration of one of these. And so Bob talks about where we're only looking at one. That would be a good demo that then we can say we can build in other locations. So we're still thinking about things. Our next, kind of thing to work on is maybe get more congressional support. Or is he? Oh, he's next back there. And to possibly, see if we can reinvigorate a demonstration program to give people an idea of what could work or maybe doesn't work. So.
I think it's like the space program. We have to explore. We have to do things. The California Ocean Protection Council's last annual report in 2024, the conclusion of the report said very clearly, it says, California needs bold, dynamic action. That's what we're proposing. We're saying, yeah, we agree. Let's do it. Let's get some pilot projects done. Let's start dumping some rocks. Let's test it out. Let's find out what works. Franklin Roosevelt, I studied political science in school, and Franklin Roosevelt had an attitude where he said, my approach is to try something. If it doesn't work, admit it, and then try something else. But above all, try something. That's what the whole world is trying to figure out, how to cope with sea level rise. Nobody's figured it out yet. We've got to try and figure it out. I think Pacifica is in a perfect opportunity to be a pioneer in all of this because you've got a supportive community, you've got big waves that are coming in a good place. Watching big waves being ridden by good surfers is really exciting. Mavericks is a great wave, but you can't see it from the beach because it's a half mile out in the ocean. If you go over and see a contest at the Bonsai Pipeline on the north shore of Hawaii, it's this beautiful big wave that breaks right in front of the beach. Everybody can see what's happening. It's like a ballet show. It's fabulous. And ballet and NASCAR racing all at once, right? So there's a big wave that comes in here north of the Sharps Park Pier already. It just doesn't have very good shape. If we can put a reef out there that shapes that wave into a nice, and I'm a goofy foot, so of course I want it to be a left. But it goes a peak and goes off in both directions out there. It'd be a great contest quality wave that we think we can do. It's here. Pacifica's, if you're supportive of it here in Pacifica, the Bay Area, Northern California is the heartland of the environmental movement in the whole country. I mean, John Muir used to live here, right? It's been that way for a long time. I think we can show a whole bunch of parts of the world how to do things better than we've done. My daughter's worked for Oxford University for 10 years, so I've been paying attention to Oxford. And 10 years ago, they came up with a whole new department at very prestigious college, and the whole idea was to try and get the government to stop making the same mistakes. It's a great concept, is to really look at things and say, well, let's try something different. That's all we're doing. We appreciated Congressman Liccardo's interest in it. I met with him last week. We've talked to the lieutenant governors about it. She's at the State Lands Commission. She's interested in it. We're getting the interest in people. We think we've got a good idea. We asked the congressman to just kick the tires. That's what we're saying. Check this out. We think we've got a good idea here. Looking forward to exploring it with you all further. To us, it's very exciting.
Well, and again, you've segued for us to a couple of questions that came in on funding. Given today's political climate, as well as, budget cuts all over, both at the federal and the state level, what do you think is the likelihood of being funded for such a project? And would an artificial Reef reduce the estimated costs of the BBIRP project or extend the life of that solution?
That's beyond my pay grade.
Yeah, what we're proposing would would reduce the waves reaching the seawall, and it would reduce the overtopping and reduce the loading, so it would extend the life, conceptually. And what was the other question about funding?
Chance of
Yeah,
funding.
I'm going to give that to Tom. He's the planning director for the.
Yeah, I tap danced on this one earlier as part of the presentation because, yeah, it's a very, very valid question. And I don't have a crystal ball. It's really hard to read Washington, particularly these days. But assuming things get back to the way the bureaucracy used to work, which is a big assumption, I personally thought that Pacifica had a very good chance of being shortlisted, as it were, to be funded for one of these big studies that would allow solutions like this to get, their day in court. And then potentially come out the other end of that study process as an authorized project, and then you still have to wait for project funding. But the pattern of late, at least on big Corps of Engineers projects, has been that they will see their project funds not too long after the recommended solution gets authorized for construction. So would it happen quickly? No. Upfront about that, I think Bob or somebody threw out the term a decade earlier. I mean, I think, for major federal dollars to come through the core study process and the implementation process, that's at least a decade. So I just want to, some of us hopefully will still be around then. But there's a lot of things that we can do now to make sure that that end goal can be realized, and having community support is a part of that. And so again, thank you for having us here, because that's really what this is about.
Okay, and you kind of answered the next question. Once funding is secured, what's the estimated time to complete the project? But it sounds like it's in phases of different levels of funding, the study and...
Right, and I think, we talked a little bit about a demonstration project, and that could be on a shorter timeline. My personal concern with that is that we probably wouldn't do something out here within what would be a typical demonstration project budget. That might be more appropriate at a more sheltered location. I'm a little concerned about doing something undersized out here, but I know George is more optimistic than me. Maybe there's some way to weave through that knothole, but yeah, I think something that could be sooner and maybe more of a test of concept, maybe down at a more sheltered location like Surfers Beach and Half Moon Bay. It could happen sooner than the more protracted process I was alluding to earlier. And then, my personal knowledge is more of the Corps of Engineers process. There are other programs. I guess Kevin was saying, was really about to show some love to Pacifica, and now they can't. But so yeah, I guess the short answer is I don't know.
And maybe a question for either Bob or George. So once the project was all funded, the studies were all done, how long do you think it would take to construct the artificial reef?
Oh, construction itself wouldn't be, the time element. The bigger time element would be the studies that would show that it would work. So in the early days of the Corps, those who knew the Corps, and Anna Eshu was not a fan of the Corps because of this, and I sat next to her last year, and she said, "I hate the Corps," but she had to work with them, and she was very successful in getting a lot of projects. But those were like 10-year studies. The construction, you could do the construction in a year. Those breakwaters, like Bob said, we build breakwaters all over the place, and we know how to do that. the reef portion of it, a little more uncertainty, and that's probably what would take a little bit more of the studies in both numerical and physical modeling. Kind of we alluded, we didn't talk much about numerical modeling, but I just showed a little bit about the physical modeling. But I think the studies are what you want to be assured of, that something has a reasonable percentage of working. So, but the construction, I think, once we feel that we know what we want to do, and it has a lower, has a better uncertainty or lower risk, that, I mean, the construction itself wouldn't take that long.
But we need to get started. Actually, we've talked about this for about 20 years. The first time this came up, this concept came up in Pacifica was with the Corps of Engineers Regional Sediment Management Plan. That was done around 2010, 2012. And it included looking at artificial reefs and beach widening. And then again in the city's adaptation plan that was completed in 2018. And each of those times there hasn't been enough money or funding to really look at this in detail. And of course, something that has some uncertainty to it and seems kind of big and all that is put aside. So we're really trying to get some attention paid to this so that we don't waste another, or don't let another 20 years go by.
And I'm saying there's a sense of urgency to all this. We have to treat this like this is happening, folks. Look what happened to your pier out here this year. It's not going to go away. We've got to figure out how to deal with these things, and we won't be able to figure it out unless we try stuff. So I thought that we could probably make it quicker, in less than 10 years, by cutting down on the permit process. Well, I think Elon Musk could go along with efficiency on that. I think we can show that we can do things quicker and faster and better. I've worked in government. I know you can get stuff done. So I think if we can show that it's cheaper, ultimately, to do something better, I think it will always come out that it's cheaper to do it better. So I think we have to move on this. We have to have bold, dynamic action, just like the Ocean Protection Council said we need to. So because we've already got all the permits process done for that project in Oceanside, and we're not doing much different, it shouldn't take us 5 years to get the permits. And if we can cut the 5 years down to 3 years because they've already done it, well, then that's going to be a lot cheaper, right? So we can make things happen better. Government can work and do things. I'm confident that we can do that.
And so is there a possibility, too, there's a question, and we're almost done, because pairing with this is bringing in sand, bringing in material to replenish the beach as well. So what is the process Pacifica would need to undertake to pursue receiving dredged coarse sand from the San Francisco Bay, since it's not part of the beneficial reuse of maintenance dredging and shipping bays? What is the process, and could that maybe be done in parallel with the studies that you have talked about?
Yeah, thanks for the question, because I keep bringing this up. We would have to find a sponsor and find funding and go through an analysis of what kind of equipment would be used. Because right now the equipment used to mine the sand in central San Francisco Bay is equipment that can operate in the bay, but they can't really operate in the ocean. And it's also, there are companies that, this is their life, this is what they do, their livelihood. So there's an economic consequence. And then there's an institutional issue where the mining is within the San Francisco Bay Conservation and Development Commission's authority. That's the Coastal Zone Management Agency for San Francisco Bay, whereas we're in the California Coastal Commission zone. And you would think that wouldn't make any difference, but in reality, it's a complication. And I keep bringing this up, but I haven't found anybody that sounded like they were willing to take it on. But I do think it's something worth looking at, and I think it'd be much better than trying to find a new offshore coarse sand source, especially if they're already mining it. It would be nice if we had some of that sand instead of concrete, which is okay. I mean, concrete's good. It's an important economic activity. I don't mean to diminish that, but I have no idea how long that would take. I think we're talking perhaps around the same time frame as 10 years, but maybe it could be done sooner. And then if it is done, I think other communities would want to get the sand as well. So it might be a little bit of a fight with other places. I'm not sure.
Yeah, our dredging processes are quite well known. I mean, part of the analysis would be the haul distance, the type of equipment to onload the sediment, the type of equipment to offload the sediment. Are they split hull barges where they can get it into like 20 feet of water or 10 feet? They can't get right up on the beach. They'd have to, if you were going to build a beach, you'd have to pump it on the beach out of these barges. So these are all, I mean, they're all doable things. And there's all, engineering firms, they specialize in coming up with the cost estimates for all that. Sediment, certainly, if there was a sediment offshore site here, we're not sure about that. I think USGS did a little bit of analysis. But that would be a much closer haul distance, and of course, distance is money. So all of those parameters, engineers can figure out pretty easily for the sand. Can you find the kind of sand you want? The sand typically, well, the material, I won't say sand, the material in the deepwater ship channel that cuts through offshore San Francisco is typically finer, because once you dredge a channel, the material that falls in these channels that have to be dredged every year, is not the real good coarse sand. It's a finer material. There may be a component of coarseness to it. And so that's why I was talking about this overfill ratio. If there's only, 10% of the really good sand that you want, you're going to have to put, double or triple the amount on the beach so that when the fines wash away, what stays is that component of sand that you want there. I don't think the deepwater ship channel has a lot of coarse sand. So then you're looking at inside the bay. And the further in the bay you go, the further it's going to just cost because of the haul distance and so forth. So, but those are all things that can easily be figured out.
Yeah, I didn't mean to sound negative. Actually, there's equipment available, the hopper dredges, the ships, and they lower something down and they suck up the sand and they come over and they can pump it out and pump it on the beach. This was just done at Ocean Beach in 2021. So there is equipment, there are people that can do it. It's not hard to do. It just requires a lead agency and funding, and it's not something that's been done in this area. And so the different groups that do different things, they're like, well, we don't do that. That's kind of a weird thing. Like, we thought it would be simple to get sand from Pillar Point Harbor and place it at Surfers Beach. And that's been, 20 years, and it's hopefully going to happen this summer.
We have all the permits, so
Oh, yeah. Well, the bid's open in a week or so. But anyway, it is happening this summer, and that is a super simple project from a construction standpoint.
Who would serve as a lead agency for a project like that? Who would you see doing that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think the city would have to be involved. I think the state of California, the State Lands Commission has authority over the shoals in San Francisco Bay, so they might be the lead agency. They're the lead agency for the environmental impact report that's going on right now for the renewal of the sand mining leases. So I think it would be State Lands, City of Pacifica, and then everybody else would be funders or resource agency reviewers.
What are the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, BOEM? They've been showing up at some of the workshops and things that other of us participate in because they have sand resources for their offshore under their jurisdiction that they want to see used. So that's another scenario.
They were the renamed, the old Minerals Management Service got renamed to this. So there were, when you were looking for offshore minerals, well, quartz material is an offshore material that we can use. So they would get involved in that.
Okay. And the final set of questions have to do not with surfers, but other creatures out in the water. Have you been talking at swimmers and other creatures that swim? What do you think the impact would be on whale migrations? We see the whales very frequently out here north of the pier, so some folks have asked some concerns about what might that impact be, both on whales, whale migration, and also the impact on crab fishing.
Go ahead, Brian.
Well, because of my current employment, I have to keep a little quiet on some of the questions. I don't think we know these yet, as far as I'm aware. I'm not a marine biologist, but with the extensive permitting that we're talking about, all of this would be addressed. And if anything, I think, it might improve the crabbing, just the rocky habitat and the feed, but I think this is an unknown that would be studied down the line.
Parrot something Bob said earlier or maybe it was George, when he was talking about, a breakwater is probably really going to be more effective, easier to do, better understood. But that's where you're going to have circulation patterns and things that are going to be much more impactful. So I think, the reef is certainly less impactful than a breakwater for the critters we're talking about.
Okay. You've made it. We're only a half an hour over time, and but that's the end of the questions that we received. So thank you.
This was shorter than some of the planning commission meetings I went to. So
We are planning to talk to some biologists. That's our next step. That's one of the gaps. And I love whales. I'm in the water with a lot of marine life all the time, and I think that, well, we'll see what people come up with, but hopefully it wouldn't be a negative for marine life. Hopefully it would be a positive.
I'll leave you with something positive. When I started surfing, they in 1960, you very rarely saw a pelican. They were almost extinct. They were down to 500 nesting pairs on the Anacapa Islands in the 70s. We outlawed DDT, and that one thing, the DDT was causing the birds their eggshells to be weak, and the mamas were crushing their babies. By that one action, now the pelicans are all the time. Every time you go out there and you see a pelican, that's an environmental success story. And you can be proud of it because it's something that we did that we were doing wrong, and we corrected it, and we did it better, and the pelicans there's 5,000 nesting pairs down at the Anacapa Islands. So don't ever think that we can't do good things. We can. So thank you for sticking with us tonight and for your interest and your curiosity. And we appreciate your enthusiastic support.